Hello and welcome back to the AI Marketers Playbook, where we cover actionable frameworks to help you leverage AI and marketing strategies in your business. I'm Audrey Chia, your host, and today I have with me someone who brings structure, clarity, and serious results to the world of AI-powered marketing. Meet Abigail Merrill, a seasoned marketer based in North Carolina's Research Triangle with more than 15 plus years of experience spanning experiential and digital marketing. Now, she has worked with both solopreneurs as well as major brands like OpenTable and Nectar Mattress. And I think what sets Abigail apart is his sharp focus on making AI practical, especially in more highly regulated industries like pharma, fintech, or even real estate. Abigail is the creator of the AI Accelerator Toolkit and a 4-step integration framework that we will be covering in a bit. Abigail, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me, Audrey. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for being on. I would love to know a bit more about yourself, your journey. How did you get started in the whole world of AI?
For sure. So, like many folks, I started off in marketing and sales enablement, and sales enablement is kind of like the crux of how we actually do marketing. So, marketing operations and making sure that the sales team have what they need in order to, close those deals and get people to events. And so I actually started off in the operations side. And then I was like, hey, you know what? I've been planning these huge, large conferences for all of these people and really focusing on the marketing efforts. So I got my certification in marketing, and that was back in 2019. And I've been really focused on helping every step of the customer journey for my clients. And as you said, in highly regulated industries. So from pharmaceuticals to finance to real estate. So I really focus on kind of the business side of how to integrate AI appropriately. So when more and more of my clients were coming to me about marketing strategy and sales, and then I was working with a client back in, I want to say October of 2021. So before ChatGPT, they were a competitor of them, 2022, excuse me. And then ChatGPT came along and I was like, this is amazing. And so just from that very beginning, I have really focused on just building my skills, just like a lot of your listeners here. Just started off with experimentation and seeing how I can include it within small use cases. And so today I'd really like to talk to your listeners and kind of share this proven framework that has really worked for my clients. And it's based on business acumen and the actual process of incorporating AI safely and responsibly into our practices, not just for those immediate gains, but also for the repeatable success and being able to scale that. Because as we know, some marketers and some businesses, especially here in the US, are kind of hitting fire a little bit in the sense that, oh, well, maybe we don't even need marketers now that we have ChatGPT. And so my framework really gives people that competitive edge and really helps them shine within the organization, and also bringing those repeatable ROI.
Yeah, I love what you said about it's not just a one-time thing, right? It's like how do you do it consistently? And even before AI as a marketing team, you already have to figure out how do you, create content that's scalable, that's also consistent. Now, I want to double click on one thing you said. You talk about, bringing AI, but looking at it with a more business lens, right? That point of view. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, for sure. So for me, I have always had to be the outsider looking in with consulting and going, I had to always make a case for the management team to either continue to hire me, to continue to use me, to integrate these strategies that I recommend. And so really that began to really think about that when it came to our AI use and our AI adoption, and what I'm recommending to my clients, solopreneurs through small businesses, is how we actually build a case for the management team, for the leadership, so they're able to see your results and be able to know exactly where your efforts have been spent, see you as a leader within the organization itself, and then it's kind of a slam dunk win for them to want to set you up, either give you more money that you're able to set aside for these pilot programs, or, maybe you're able to upskill your team or upskill yourself. So really taking what you're able to accomplish within the framework and within the phase 3 phases, and then you just lay it out there, and it makes your case super easy for leadership.
So curious to know, like, what are some maybe common use cases that you have seen across the board in terms of using AI and plugging it into your business workflows?
Yeah, for sure. So for me, like I said, I really come at it from like a sales enablement, marketing operations standpoint. And that's where I really see AI really helping. And of course, it can make fun photos, and it can, update our copy and, create fun memes. But really thinking about how AI can really be the backbone of your organization. And so part of the framework I teach is starting off with, let's look at what your current tools you already have in your toolkit are. So I never want to bloat an organization, have too many, people saying, oh, we can't afford that, we can't do this. So I recommend people looking at the tools that they already own. And sometimes they have the AI features embedded already within them. And so finding those particular use cases, it's not AI for more AI's sake, right? Let's not cause us to have so much more on our plate. So let's really use and learn the tools that we are already using, we're already comfortable with. And let's see if they already have those AI features. That's the quickest win you can provide, not only yourself, but also your team. Sometimes it's a matter of AI features are embedded already and maybe they've been turned on, but people haven't had a chance to use them, haven't had a chance to learn them. So that's another part of the framework, is like making that an important step. So going back to your question about the best use cases, it really depends on the person. Within the phase 1, I have people set up SMART goals. Are you familiar with SMART? For those listeners that may not know, it's an acronym that starts with specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So when we are really looking at what our current processes are, and going back to business acumen basics for a second, a lot of the solopreneurs and a lot of teams that I see that are very small, maybe they're a small business, they haven't actually even documented what their current processes are, their manual processes are. So when they're trying to look for ways that AI can be included or turn on a new feature, it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall, if you know that reference, and just see what sticks. Without a plan, without a systematic way of measuring those, not only are they not going to know what's working, they're not going to be able to apply that leverage to maybe fund more pilots in the future, maybe request more testing and more tools and more trainings from their management team. So really making sure that we are focused on building our responsible use case up front is going to be your surefire way to have those repeatable wins. And I'm sorry I can't give you exact specifics on what's the best use case, because it really is person to person. Saving 5 hours a week is one of the first activities we do in my toolkit and with my clients. And sometimes saving 5 hours a week is great for someone, but another person is if they could just cut out drudgery, something that gives them, doesn't drain their energy reserves, by doing something manual and offloading that to AI, that can be the biggest use case for somebody. Even if it's not equating a bunch of numbers, sometimes it's that qualitative benefit that other folks may not see.
And I think being able to offload the things that you don't like to do to AI is one of the best parts about AI, because it actually frees up your bandwidth, your mental and emotional capacity to be more creative, work on higher level strategic stuff, and being able to see things in maybe a different perspective, because now you have just more time, right? To breathe, to work, to play, to
Yeah.
experiment. And I think that's the beauty of AI. You mentioned something about sales enablement. I know you've been super big in this space. Perhaps you could share with us like one example of how teams can leverage AI in their sales processes.
Yeah, for instance, so I'll give you an example. So, sales enablement is kind of like a newer term. Some people are calling it performance marketing, rev ops marketing. Sometimes it's just considered marketing operations, right? But so, whatever you call it, it's creating great content that aligns with your messaging that you provide to the sales team. Okay. So, how that can be provided is maybe it's a really nice flyer. One time I created a whole campaign. It was just a 4-day campaign for a client, and I used AI from start to finish, right? So, the product team was too busy to give me any information, so I just used what I could to gather as much information about this new product. I put it into NotebookLM, just throwing out tools, and sorry if that's jibber jabber, but sometimes it might be helpful for people. Threw all of the sources into NotebookLM, which is a AI from the Gemini labs. And so that's really great if you just want to use only the sources that you've been given. And that's really great, especially, like I said, in highly regulated industries where you have to be very, very careful about the sources that you're using. Sometimes there's scientists involved, sometimes there's, regulators involved. So threw everything I could into NotebookLM to learn what I could about this new product. Then I brought all of that information over to ChatGPT and said, here's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to create a flyer. I'm trying to create something, that they can actually email out to all of their folks. I also need to make a 3-week campaign with 3 different emails, at different parts of the journey. And I need to make a LinkedIn copy, right? That also amplifies this. So those are the kind of things that, it would take a long time to make all of that copy, making sure it's right for each of those platforms, making sure that it aligns with the messaging, making sure it also aligns with what the salespeople actually say and what they find to be beneficial, because they know their client, they know the customers better than anybody. So sometimes working with them, that's another part of sales enablement, and that's why I've never really separated a marketing department from a sales department. I just think it's all together, right? Because marketing is trying to sell and sales are trying to market themselves as well. So they're having those touch points directly with the client. So I really find what they have to say valuable. So I would pull that back in and say, here's what exactly the sales team likes to say. Here's what their clients are used to saying. Of course, I have a very, very long ChatGPT, highly curated prompt that helps me identify and create personas for each of these products. So that's another use case that's really helpful. But, for me, like I just really think that if you have all of these different tools at our disposal, your audience is already using a lot of these, I would highly recommend people document this, because document what has worked, what has not worked, right? When have been the times that you've literally had to go back to ChatGPT and be like, that is not what I said, like all caps, like like rage typing into, or another example is when you hit them off of each other, right? When you tell Claude that ChatGPT told you this, and then you bring it back over to ChatGPT and say, this is what Claude told me. And it's almost like high school girls like competing for the best prompts. So you play all these tricks, but at the same time, it's like with these experiments, but really not documenting those experiments and not figuring out what works and not figuring out what's repeatable. Not only are you're just winging it, you forget things, you forget your processes, models change and features update. So then what worked for one model may not work for another. So what are you able to kind of find that will really work for you long term?
You shared so many great points, right? First is like being able to use different tools, and also being able to get them to work alongside each other or be that, competitor, right? So that you get to put them in a test and understand their strengths and weaknesses. And then you, as a human curator, you become that judge and you synthesize all that information and you figure out what works best for my clients. And then you put on that lens. And I think the second thing you said that is a very important use case for people is if you are in a very technical industry, if you have loads of information you need to quickly digest, then a tool like NotebookLM or using a tool like Perplexity will help you to quickly find sources, understand the materials you already have, and then build that brief so that now AI has that context, that brief to then work off. And I think that's something that for marketers or even teams doing sales enablement, you really want to consider how best to leverage these tools.
Yeah. And if research is something that is really important to you and gathering all those sources, I would highly recommend Gemini Deep Research. So that's probably the best one out there right now. We do have ChatGPT Deep Research that is not confusing at all because they are the same names. But the reason why I like Gemini better is only because it's free and they don't have as many limits with how many sources that you put in. But I will say it's exhaustive, right? So if you're doing a research paper and you need a ton of different sources, go to Gemini and then maybe take that information and put it back into ChatGPT so it's a little bit more digestible. But it's funny because as an AI trainer, as a consultant, I'm constantly being asked by people, what should I use? What's the latest thing? How do I stay up to date on all of this? And, even the actual creators of these LLMs, so like the big ones, Grok, OpenAI, ChatGPT, Anthropic by Claude, Gemini, they're putting these things out there, these new models out there all the time, and they put it on training data and they have these capabilities, but it's still a little unpredictable to them as well. So I hope it's reassuring to the audience to know that even if you feel like you understand it today, it might not be the same tool as tomorrow. It might have changed the model. They might have done a whoopsie and put out a model that was too soon, and it might change everything for you. And so, creating an environment even for yourself or maybe for your team that is open to experimentation and open to failing and having that gray area and making that okay for if you're a manager, if you're, a business owner yourself, the safety net of having a framework in place, having those safety guardrails, the privacy and ethics. That's one of the steps that I go over, kind of setting up ahead of time and then letting your people, if they go through the framework, letting them experiment. Maybe they might find something, they might be able to 10x your work and, really make some changes, and letting those innovators kind of thrive within your organization and creating that environment there's something really beautiful about that.
Absolutely. And speaking of frameworks, right, I would love to, take a peek at your framework that you take businesses through so that people now have an idea of how do they even get started integrating or implementing AI in their workflows.
For sure. I'm going to share my screen. Yeah, okay, so this is my AI scaling framework. It's just 3 phases. I've brought it down from 4 steps to 3 steps. It seems to be really helpful for folks. But really, this is a repeatable process that has built-in compounding effects that are really going to show your leadership the ROI that they're looking for. And so whether you are a solopreneur or an enterprise team, this is going to work for you. So phase 1 really starts off with align. And we want to align our goals. We want to look through our current manual workflows and see where we might be able to find some of those opportunities that we might want to turn into a use case and find that highest impact opportunity that AI might be involved in. And maybe you can offload it to them. Another part of this step is really talking about the safety and ethics that go into AI and what that means for your business, because the goal is certainly to keep you safe, your business safe, the information safe. For phase 2, we're really talking about how we integrate, right? So this is all about, you want to integrate quickly and you want to do it responsibly. So we've built some of those guardrails in place from the align step, and now we're ready to integrate. One of the most important steps that I feel like that people lose sight of is really, and as I spoke about a little bit earlier, is really looking at the current tools that you already have and maybe some of those hidden AI features that, maybe you just need to turn on, or maybe you have an IT department who hasn't really figured it out what they want to do, and maybe they've locked everything down and that's their, answer to everything. But maybe that align step, being able to offer them that, safety and guidance worksheet might be something that might help them loosen up the reins a little bit. Then we're going to talk about actually incorporating that into our workflows. And again, we're talking about what the definition of workflows are, because well before there was AI automation, there was just regular automation, right? So there was triggers for emails and, one thing would lead to another. And so really we're going back to the business acumen side of things. We need to actually document from phase 1. We're actually documenting our current steps. So that's manual steps of how to send out an email. How many steps does it take? How many people is that touching? How many tools are you using in order to send out that email? How frequently are you sending that out? How many hours? So really that's what I talk about. That's what I mean when I refer to workflows, is really kind of even pre-AI. Let's take that out. Let's get that right first. Let's get the manual side right first, and before we start talking about any sort of integrations or new tools. And then our final step is really about scaling. And so you've done a pilot, you have a use case that seems to really work. Maybe you can optimize it by going deeper with maybe some tools. You've had some other amazing speakers on this podcast about showing really cool workflows and, using Make and really finding those automations. And please go back to that when you're at that step, because those are highly valuable and can help you kind of advance and take your workflows to the next level. And then again, and the listeners are probably, I'm preaching to the choir right now, but Audrey, continuous training and learning is something that, we shouldn't take for granted. And having resources like your podcast and where people can actually just continue to sharpen their skills, it actually helps rise the tide for their, fellow marketers, their team members, maybe from people from other departments, and of course throughout their whole organization. So really this is just a repeatable path that people can take. So, after we hit scale, we go back to align, because what we're really focused on is growth and finding something. We just continue to build on our successes.
It's very nice that this framework isn't just for marketing teams, right? You can go beyond marketing teams. You can apply it in your ops, in your bro.
Correct.
Even in your sales teams, right? If you get alignment on what is that objective, then you won't be integrating AI in a way that's very haphazard. Because the last thing you want to do is just try, but not have an objective in mind. And then that takes up a lot of time with no clear ROI.
Correct. Yeah. You must have a scientific background or mathematics background, because it really is you have to go into these pilots without a true objective in mind and really just looking at trying to fix the problem that you have. So, where I feel like a lot of people get hung up, and we didn't talk too much about the hype and stuff that AI has, but kind of leaning into the hype and just saying, AI is going to replace me, or AI can just automate my entire workflow, and there's not going to be a need for marketing teams anymore. And, just very, very haphazard kind of comments like that. And what you find is that A, there's like a lot of fear that goes into it. And then B, it really just doesn't make sense for if you're really thinking in that business mindset that we are building something, we're looking for issues, we're looking for to offset some of that drudgery and finding ways that we can incorporate AI and in a very systematic way. Yeah, so that's kind of the thought process there.
Wow, I love that. And I love that it's a framework that, not just big teams, right, but small teams can implement. And you as an individual can already start thinking, how do I
Correct.
implement this in my workflows? What makes the most sense? Then working backwards, figuring out the tools that you need or the systems that you need to get there. And I'm maybe curious to know, Abigail, since you've worked with, quite a number of teams, right, what are some key challenges that businesses usually face when trying to implement AI?
Well, I would say, what has started off, and I'm just going back to this for a second, the biggest hangup I see is the fact that we have not set up governance and any safety measures, right? So I've seen three different approaches. I've seen everything is turned on and licenses for all for ChatGPT for all. I've seen absolutely nobody is allowed to use anything, blinders on from management going, our team doesn't use ChatGPT, and where they're secretly like using their personal account and then bringing everything back over. And then some sort of hybrid of the two where they have unregulated kind of conversations and pilots are happening, maybe tons and tons of pilots are happening, maybe one or two, and nothing has really been established from that top down. So for me, and there was a study that came out from Deloitte that found that less than 10% of businesses have an adequate framework to manage these AI risks. So we love ChatGPT. Everybody loves it. But at the same time, we do have to be aware of some of the limitations that all these LLMs have, large language models have. And we need to be always doing a cost benefit analysis, going back to the fun business phrases here. It's a risk to use ChatGPT at all, right? And what does that risk mean? Okay, well, there can be a risk of hallucinations. There could be a risk of, the information being biased. It could be an information where we're not really sure who actually owns some of that data. Where, maybe there's a risk of over-reliance. There are a lot of different things in life that are risky. Like even just driving in a car can be risky in comparison to an airplane, right? But we do those analysis on ourselves every day going, okay, well, the benefit of me getting to the grocery store to feed my family and me wearing a seatbelt and having some of these protections in place, those are going to be the benefits that outweigh those risks, right? And so no one is saying that an adequate AI framework and that I teach needs to be 50 pages long, right? It just needs to be enough to keep marketing velocity going, right? Like we know exactly what we're allowed to put in ChatGPT. We know exactly what tools we're allowed to use, for instance. We know we've trained our people on to like do extra checks and for accuracy. And then, but also compliance and maybe legal and maybe our leadership team feels good about it at the end of the day too. And we're able to protect our brand. So that's one of the biggest hangups I see is just lack of governance and safety and just kind of just wishing that, we didn't even have to say those things. Talk about the ugly side of it, right?
Yeah, and I think you brought up very important points, right, about having these conversations even before implementing AI, not after. Because if you set like the strong foundations, right, then when you build on it, everyone in the organization is aligned and you have that matrix to be able to make the right decisions. Whereas if it's an afterthought, then by that time you would already have some processes in place. And if you have to then reconsider things like data and security, where does that, come into play? And that goes going to cause some problems. I'm also curious to know maybe on the fact of like safety and governance, right? What are some things that businesses should do to safeguard themselves when trying to implement AI?
Yeah, so it really depends on the size of the organization and the risks, right? So I already kind of touched on training your people up front to know exactly where their information is going. So one of the things is training, letting your people know up front, setting the guardrails in place. What I have found is that tech IT, if they are even established within an organization, does not want to touch this, right? So there needs to be small factions of people that are like us, like your listeners, that can outweigh the benefits from the risks and clearly define that and help the leadership define the risks. I really encourage within my framework that people like us, these experimenters, the folks that are eager to upskill themselves, to stay competitive within the market, these are going to be the same individuals that are spearheading the pilot programs within their organizations, helping create these safety guidelines, maybe helping their compliance. I heard one company was like, we don't really know, compliance department, we don't really know what we're supposed to do with any of this, but if you can just give us recommendations, we'll do that. And so, it sometimes they just don't have the resources. They're not interested in touching it. So your listeners, the people that are listening to this podcast, they are the ones who are going to be helping implement and make it safe for themselves, but also and safe for their brand and the data that they're putting in. But honestly, at the end of the day, we also want to have that competitive edge, right? So we want to show leadership that we're taking that initiative. We're building those skills, whether, if it's in our off time or whatever, maybe we're doing a few different pilot programs. I've had clients who have come to me and said, I want to learn this, but my company really isn't interested in anything to do with AI. So how do I find that balance? And for me, that is a bigger conversation. But at the same time, it's like we have to encourage that experimentation, and we have to do it in a way that protects ourselves as individuals, protects our brands, and doesn't get anybody in trouble. And, sometimes there is going to be companies that, we're still talking, 2 to 5 years out, and they might be obsolete because they're not interested in integrating AI safely into their workflows. But it's your listeners, it's the people that are listening to this, it's our clients that are taking it seriously, and they are going to have the upskills that they need in order to be transferable anywhere.
Yeah, I love that. And also being able to have that mindset of even if my company isn't fully supportive or implementing this, I as an individual can still take the initiative to get things done, to learn something new, so that when the time comes, I'm then ready to lead my team or contribute or even just value add to myself, right? And that is key. And I think, Abigail, maybe one other thing before we wrap up is what do you think businesses can actually do right now to start thinking about their workflows? Because we have this beautiful framework, right? And I think for a lot of business leaders, what are some simple steps that they can take, to just get started?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So I help people get started, and I really focus on making those small steps and finding those small wins. So for your audience, if they're interested, I have a free download. It is the first step in my framework for AI scaling. So we're talking about, and typically I sell this within my AI Accelerator Toolkit. So this is like a 30-page plus document, but the download is just 2 pages, and it's save 5 hours a week with AI. And this worksheet is going to help jumpstart safe and responsible AI integration. And like I said, this works for solopreneurs, startups, small businesses, and it's really helping to identify current manual processes that that will identify and then lead to real opportunities to reclaim 5+ hours a week in your schedule. And Rutgers and Google did a study in 2024 that estimated about 122 hours can be saved annually just by automating some of these drudgery tasks to AI, right? So I want 122 hours back in my year. I want to go on vacation, right? So if you're interested in that, your readers or listeners are interested in that, they can download that QR code, and I'm sure you can put it in the show notes as well.
Definitely. We will be popping that in the show notes, so be sure to grab that resource. Thank you for sharing it with us, Abigail. And thank you for sharing so much tactical advice for business owners to start implementing AI. So for folks who want to continue to connect with you or explore your AI accelerator, where is the best place?
Yeah, for sure. They can go to growthuppartners.com, and I'm constantly putting out free materials, and I'll be launching my B2C course pretty soon that I've only been reserving for my large enterprise. So it'll be good.
Super exciting. Thank you so much for sharing your resource, and I'm very excited for your launch. If you are listening to this podcast, don't forget to check out Abigail's content. And thank you so much for folks for tuning in. Don't forget to hit the bell for more actionable AI and marketing insights. We will see you next week. Take care.